Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay with Kieran Downey. We are here 2 days after the Miami Grand Prix, ready to break it all down. And we've got a lot to talk about because we watched everything yesterday. We watched the sprint race, the qualifying session, and the Grand Prix yesterday as we were travelling back from Monaco. We had a whole day pretty much just to relax. The weather was absolutely atrocious in the south of France. It rained torrentially, so we basically just spent the day indoors until our flight at 10 o'clock watching all of the action from the Miami Grand Prix weekend. I have to say, before we get into it, Monaco was amazing. The Formula E was class. The whole thing was just vibes on vibes on vibes. The 3 days was absolutely insane. We will have a whole vlog coming about that at some point this week. So keep an eye out for that. I'm very excited to basically get through all the footage and start editing that together as soon as this episode is out. But on to Miami, and I have to say, I'm pleasantly surprised by Miami because for a track that we all complain about, we all think it is pretty dull. The circuit's not great. It doesn't actually provide decent racing. We got an insanely good sprint race because it was weather affected. We got some interesting qualifying sessions, but that is also down to the fact that we are currently in a qualifiers championship, and I think that's very clear now that this is a qualifiers championship. And we actually got a decent Grand Prix for the first sort of half of the Grand Prix. I'd say was pretty decent, and then it kind of tailed off towards the end. And I know this is just F1, it's just peak F1 that we slag Miami off all the time, and then we get a decent Miami race weekend, but we still want more. We know that Miami doesn't produce good racing. We did get some decent battles in the opening stages of the main race, and then it kind of just tailed off towards the end. We were potentially going to be getting rain, and I think that would have maybe spiced things up in the closing stages of the race, which did get a bit meh, only to be saved by the radio messages from Lewis Hamilton. But I've come away from Miami wanting a little bit more. However, it was a good race nonetheless, and I'm very happy that after however many years Miami's been on the calendar now that we finally got a decent race. Now, because this is basically the whole weekend in one, we're going to talk about all three sessions, big sessions, the sprint, the main quali, and the race. The race being the big portion of it. We'll go through, obviously, each team in the championship order from 2023, as we normally do with our race reviews, and we will touch on all of the big points from the sprint and from qualifying. And kicking things off with Kick Sauber, with Gabriel Bortoleto, who finished the sprint 15th, qualified 13th for the main race and did not finish, and Nico Hülkenberg, who finished the sprint in 9th, qualified for the main race in 16th and finished the Grand Prix 14th. I don't really have anything to say about Sauber from the sprint race. In terms of qualifying for Bortoleto, it is amazing that he managed to get 13th in the qualifying. You know, for Bortoleto, he's not lighting up the timesheets. He's not fighting for points. He still hasn't scored any. But there is promise with Bortoleto. There is something in him where he has these like moments where he throws in a good qualifying or he has a decent race. Not scoring points, but there's promise there, and the teams can work with that. He's a promising young talent that is in his rookie year, that's not driving the best of cars, part of a team that is going to be so focused on a huge regulation change next year and a complete team change, a team ownership change, that Bortoleto is managing his way through. And I do think that you sometimes see Bortoleto and you think, my God, like, just do something. But then I kind of put it all into perspective, and I think actually what I see from Bortoleto is incredibly promising, and that's what teams will also see, that he has promise about him, that he is a talent that they can mould and pull the best parts out of, so that, you know, in the future he can go and fight for points and wins and whatever. And I think that is something that you can say for a lot of the rookies, that there is promise in these rookies, and I think that will excite the teams because they can, you know, iron out the kinks. Look at Oscar Piastri. He joined as a rookie and he had some clear problems, one being his outright pace, one being his tyre management. He's now worked through a lot of those issues, and we're coming into his third season and he's leading the championship. So I definitely think that it's looking promising for Bortoleto, and hopefully he just gets enough time to really sort of work out the kinks, get a decent car under him, and we'll see what he's really, really capable of. Fortunately for Bortoleto, he did have to retire from the main race. He had a PU issue, and he wasn't the only one with a Ferrari-powered engine that faced problems, because Oliver Bearman also had to retire with a PU issue. So there seems to have been something going on with that Ferrari power unit this weekend that caused 2 retirements. However, I do think that it is a fairly decent, I think for qualifying, it's a fairly decent performance for Bortoleto. Now for Nico Hülkenberg, I don't really have anything to say from the sprint, quali, or the main race, and because we've got so much to talk about, I'm kind of just going to skip him. For Hülkenberg, I think the team played a bit of an unwise game, shall we say. They left him out incredibly long on that first stint, and this is something that was really frustrating me, because we had all of this talk about rain. There's rain coming during the race. Be aware, there's, you know, a really heavy downpour on its way, and I think it actually just missed the track completely. I think we had a little pitter-patter at one point, but whatever rain was on the radar just, I think, completely went around the track. It just didn't come, and they had left Hülkenberg out so long on those first tyres, that first stint, gambling on the rain coming or a safety car or something that just didn't come, and he just lost track position that way. So a bit unfortunate for Hülkenberg there. Next up is Williams and Alex Albon, who finished the sprint 11th, qualified 7th for the main race and finished 5th, and Carlos Sainz, who did not finish the sprint, qualified 6th for the main race and finished 9th. Now I feel bad for Alex, because he actually finished the sprint 4th on the road, which is fucking brilliant from Alex Albon and a Williams, but a 5-second time penalty for failing to stay above the minimum time set by the ECU under the safety car meant that he was actually pushed down to 11th. But a very good weekend for Alex Albon on the whole. It's amazing to see the turnaround, not only for Williams as a team, but also just for Alex within himself, because we went from, you know, the past few seasons where you would be lucky if Williams were P15, 16, you'd be incredibly lucky if they scored a point. Albon, last year especially, had really got himself down with the woes of the team, and it was quite upsetting to watch him really struggle out on track and just not have it, almost like he didn't have it in him. Not in himself, but just the issues of the team just dragging him down. And we've completely 180'd into 2025. That team seems refreshed. The mindsets seem a lot better, even within Alex himself, and the performances we're getting are insanely good. And you can see the effect that James Vowles is having on that team. It must have been really hard for this team to go into every weekend for the past couple of years and know you're not going to be able to compete for points. You are probably going to have some kind of issue with a car. There's probably going to be a crash, something like that. And now, you know, we're finishing 4th. Obviously, the 5-second penalty pulled away from that. But then we come into the main race and we're finishing 5th. It's amazing to watch these performances from Williams and see them scoring points. And they must be on cloud 9 with the performances they're having. The team now have 2 incredibly good drivers, and they're now scoring points pretty much every weekend. It's just so refreshing to see. And I'm so happy for Alex Albon. That is a huge amount of points in the bag for that team, considering they would be lucky to score any points in the past couple of years. And now they've got 37 points and are 5th in the Constructors' Championship. It's wild, and I'm loving every second of it. And on the other side of the Williams garage, Carlos Sainz, unfortunate for him in the sprint race, he suffered a puncture out on track and had to come back to the pits to retire the car. I don't know what caused the puncture, but incredibly unfortunate for him. Then we got to qualifying, and I have to say, everyone really sort of questioned Carlos's move to Williams, and I have to say that it was the best option out of a bad bunch of options, it seemed at that time, because we were coming off a year where Williams were just not performing that well. There was such a crash-heavy year for the team. There was driver swaps, everything. It was just a bit of a messy year. You know, we were coming into this year, we were all a bit worried of how that team's going to perform this year, and oh, it's Carlos, and you know, he's gone to this team, he's gone from Ferrari that he was fighting for wins, and now he's going to go in Williams, and it's all just going to come crashing down. And it's been so promising, and I have to say, Sainz will be absolutely laughing right now, because he outqualified his old team. Sainz and a Williams, in fact, both Williams drivers out-qualified the Ferrari drivers. Like, in what world does that make sense? And we'll obviously come and talk about the woes of Ferrari shortly, but Sainz must be absolutely laughing because that's insane. And listen, I think the success of Williams so far this year is multiple different things. I think, you know, the James Vowles effect and the way that man conducts business. You know, he's not only an incredibly smart man and very good at what he does, but he's an incredible leader and motivator and just knows what to say and how to get people motivated into doing like the best that they can do. And it's a clear sign of, like, a clear vote of confidence in what James Vowles is doing in Williams that Carlos Sainz even went there. So that's a huge uplift for them. And now we're getting these great performances out on track. It's just so good. I'm loving Williams this season. And it's just wild to me that Sainz is, in fact, Sainz and Albon have both out-qualified the Ferraris for the main race. For the main race, you know, he had some nice little battles out on track with Leclerc, but just couldn't really keep the Ferraris behind him. But at the end of the day, still a very good result for Williams to bring home those points. It's absolutely amazing. So more of that, please. And as I said, we are in a qualifiers championship at the moment, and we're about to enter a string of tracks where qualifying position matters. Like, we're about to enter a sort of steady flow of tracks where you can't really overtake. The cars are far too big for the circuits, and that qualifying position is going to be so important. So if they've got decent qualifying pace, we're looking, I think, at some very good points coming for Williams in the next few race weekends. And moving on to Visa Cash App RB, with Liam Lawson, who finished the sprint 13th, qualified for the main race 15th and did not finish, and Isaac Hadjar, who finished the sprint 10th, qualified for the main race 11th, and finished the Grand Prix 11th. Now, when it comes to Liam Lawson's sprint race, what is he playing at? What are you doing? I just don't understand it, because he was running a fairly good sprint race up until he decided to basically spin Alonso off the track. I just don't understand what his rationale in that was. And I've seen people say Alonso didn't leave him any room. Alonso was on the racing line, it seems to me, and Liam Lawson should have 100% backed out of that move. And listen, I don't think this has got anything to do with this, but it just harkens back to the end of last year where Lawson just seemed to have this one-sided petty feud with Alonso. We're pulling moves like this. I just don't get it. I just don't get it. I have, as I said, seen people say that Alonso was in the wrong there and, you know, it was Lawson's corner. I 100% disagree. I think it was a reckless and quite wild move to me, because as I said, he was having a very decent sprint race up to that time and just ruined it for not only Alonso but himself. To me, that was a slam dunk error on Lawson's part. It's a slam dunk penalty. I actually don't think 5 seconds was enough. I'd have maybe given him a little bit more. But, you know, here we are. The FIA, and we'll come on and talk about this in a minute as well, but the FIA don't really look at the outcomes of these incidents. They just look at what the incident is, and they just go with, that is a slam dunk 5 seconds because that is the rule book. We don't take into account what happened as well, because he's ruined Alonso's race. He actually, to be fair for me, ruined the entire sprint race, because we were having an absolute banger sprint and it caused a safety car right at the very end and robbed us of a pretty decent grandstand finish for the sprint. And listen, I think had this been the main race and this incident had happened and Alonso had crashed where he did and all that kind of stuff, they would have just red flagged the race. But they decided to continue it behind the safety car. It robbed us of a decent ending. And, you know, this is what kind of frustrates me about sprint races, because we've got qualifying coming up later, there is so much about it of sort of try and preserve the car because we need to go and qualify for the main race tomorrow and we don't want to jeopardise position. And I'll talk about this when we sort of mention Kimi Antonelli later, but even like Toto Wolff refers to it as a baby race. And I just think we've still not quite got the sprints right. And I do think had Alonso's crash happened in a main race, we'd have probably red flagged the race and then just restarted. But I wonder if we decided to continue it behind a safety car because of the timing of it all. Because after this sprint finishes, we've only got so long until we qualify. So I'm not going to put all the blame on Lawson here for ruining the sprint, because I think the sprint format in itself has a big part to play in that. But I'm beginning to, with each weekend, get really just quite irked by Liam Lawson and his behaviour out on track. I don't see the driver that we seen when he replaced Daniel Ricciardo for those few races in 2023. I just don't see it, and I'm not impressed by him. I think he does reckless and quite dangerous moves. I think he's quite petty, and I'm just not really here for Lawson at the moment. In terms of his main race, I complete 180 myself. I do feel a little bit bad for him. He got caught up in a little bit of a collision with, I think collision's maybe a bit of a strong word, but got caught up in a little bit of a tangle with Jack Doohan on lap 1, turn 1. No penalties or anything for it. It was just deemed a lap 1, turn 1 incident, as these sort of, you know, little bumps and stuff are on the opening lap of a race. It ruined his race. He ended up having to retire the car. He had a big gash out of his side pod, and so in that I do feel a bit bad for him. But on the whole, not impressed by Liam Lawson again this weekend, which is becoming a running theme. His teammate, Isaac Hadjar, once again looking so much better than his teammate. And I'm just loving Isaac Hadjar this year, to be honest with you. Once again, outperforming, outqualifying his teammate, and then I think just a little bit unlucky in the main race. Towards the end of the main race, he was within a shot of getting a P10, but just couldn't get within the 5 seconds to Yuki Tsunoda, because Tsunoda had picked up a 5-second penalty. I think it was for speeding in the pit lane. And Hadjar just couldn't close the gap enough to him, so just missed out. I think it was by like a few tenths on a P10. He is, to me, just one of the absolute standout rookies of this year. He is so impressive, and I'm loving Hadjar. Everything about Isaac Hadjar, I'm just really enjoying. From his qualifying, his races, I love his personality. I think he's a great addition to the 20 drivers we've got. I'm loving all the social media content. There's just something about Hadjar, and I wasn't so sure about Hadjar coming into this year with him moving into F1. I wasn't the biggest fan of him in F2, but this I'm really enjoying. This Hadjar that we've got, I'm just absolutely loving it. So I think an unfortunate weekend that we couldn't really pick up any points, but very, very good. I just love seeing him out on track, and I think he's a brilliant wee driver and one of the most promising. I think there's promise amongst all of the rookies, really, but one of the most promising to go on and have a fucking banger career in Formula One. All right, moving on to Haas, and we have Esteban Ocon, who finished the sprint 12th, qualified for the main race 9th, and finished 12th, and Ollie Bearman, who finished the sprint 14th, qualified for the main race 20th, and did not finish. For Ocon, I think a fairly respectable weekend, I think unfortunately he couldn't score any points in the main race because a stellar qualifying to get that Haas into Q3, and in a fight in the constructors against Williams and kind of Aston Martin a little bit, Williams have kind of dropped them. There's now like 17 points between them now. And I know so much can change, so don't take that as Williams are they're never going to be able to catch up to Williams, because I think we're only like a quarter of the year in. But yeah, just a little bit unfortunate for Ocon. I don't really have much to say about him. His teammate, however, Oliver Bearman, I don't know what's going on. Once again, for another weekend running, we have a Haas qualifying at the back of the grid. Now, for the sprint race, he again qualified P19 and finished 8th. Absolutely insane work to get all that way on the road. I know there was some DNFs and stuff that sort of propelled him up a little bit, but no mean feat to climb that in a sprint. However, he did get a 10-second time penalty for an unsafe release in the pits into the path of Nico Hülkenberg, which then shunted him all the way back down to P14. So that's unfortunate for Bearman. But again, in the qualifying, he's qualified 20th for the race. Like, I just don't understand what is happening in Haas, where every race week, there is one of the Haas drivers just at the back of the grid. I don't get it. How many times is and it's specifically Oliver Bearman right now who's got the most, but how many times is Oliver Bearman going to have a really bad qualifying? And I know that the majority of the time he has these really bad qualifyings and then manages to fight his way through the pack. to a points finish, because we're about to come up, as I said, to a string of races where qualifying position matters because we're really hard to overtake. Let's take Imola, for example. These cars are so big and that track is so tight that overtaking is near impossible. I can see us having like a Japan on our hands where we get practically no overtakes. You know, we had stunning performances from Behrman in Bahrain, but that track is so wide and you've got so many overtaking opportunities that if he can't sort his qualifying out, he's not going to be getting any points because he can't move his way through a field that you can't overtake. You can't overtake on these tracks. So they need to sort his qualifying out. He is incredibly promising, and I think it's the same as Bortoleto, where he's having these amazing performances so they can mold him and eke out his, you know, his areas where he's struggling. They can really sort of iron them out. And I think for just now, a big focus has to be his qualifying because he can't keep qualifying at the back of the grid, especially when we're about to come on to so many tracks where the cars are too big for the track and you can't overtake. As I said, unfortunate for Behrman that he also DNF'd. No fault of his own. Mechanical issue with the car seems to be an issue with the power unit. Again, that Ferrari power unit not playing ball this weekend. But yeah, just sort out your qualifying. Please, Behrman, please. That's all I want of you. It's all I'm asking for you just now is just to sort out this qualifying pace. And moving on to Alpine, and we have Pierre Gasly, who finished the sprint 8th, qualified for the main race 18th and finished 13th, and Jack Doohan, who finished the sprint 16th, qualified for the main race 14th and did not finish. An incredibly poor qualifying from Pierre Gasly this weekend, and I think it's just F1 2025 doing F1 2025 things. The season's a bit unpredictable. And, well, I think the only thing that is predictable about it is McLaren's doing amazingly. But not a decent weekend, I think, for Pierre Gasly. Managed to pick up a point during the sprint. And, you know, it's at least that's something. But on the whole for Alpine, it's just a fairly poor weekend. There's not much I can really say for Gasly after the sprint. It is just a pretty poor performance in terms of qualifying and in terms of the race. When you stack them up against Doohan, you know, there's 7 points splitting them. Gasly's got 7, Doohan's got none. But when you look at the performances out on track, they're not massively different. It's not like Gasly's absolutely wiping the floor with Doohan. However, Doohan is just making, I think, the wrong calls. When it came to the main qualifying, I think Doohan showed why he's in Formula One with a stunning qualifying, out-qualified his teammate. You know, he was incredibly upset after the sprint quali, I think because he knew that he could do it, and he pulled it out the bag and then goes and has an incident in turn 1 with Liam Lawson and has to retire from the race. Now, I know it was all sort of chalked up to a racing incident with Doohan being on the inside of turn 1 and, you know, having a bit of a whoopsie with Liam Lawson. Doohan ended up with a puncture, couldn't make it back to the pits, ended up with a VSC. However, when it comes to Jack Doohan's race performances, I kind of just, see with Miami, right, I really just wanted him to play it safe. He's one of the few drivers where I'm like, play it safe, because he's come into this season with such a huge amount of pressure on his shoulders after the signing of Franco Colapinto, the huge support that Colapinto's got to get him into a full-time seat in F1. He is lurking there. Every week there is talk from the media, from the fans, from everyone about Jack Doohan's seat in Formula One, and is he safe, and is he going to be out this weekend, and when's Colapinto going to be in? And all I wanted for him was to play it safe. Now, coming out of Miami, yesterday, there was reports coming through that Jack Doohan is officially dropped from Alpine and that Franco Colapinto will be in from Imola next weekend. The race has been reporting on it. The BBC have started reporting on it. It is seemed to be pretty much a done deal. We're just waiting on the announcement from Alpine. Now, at this point, at the time of recording, Tuesday the 6th of May at 11:30 in the morning, there is no announcement from Alpine. However, it is believed to be coming at some point within the next few days. Apparently, it's a done deal. Apparently, after Miami, Jack Doohan was told, you're getting dropped and we're replacing you with Colapinto. I just think that there's been too many accidents from Jack Doohan across these 6 races. I can see why Alpine are making the call they're making, and Briatore, we know, is so cutthroat. We kind of seen this coming. There's always been talk of Imola being the sort of cut-off point for Doohan. If he hadn't performed within 6 races, he's going. We will talk about this more in depth when it all gets announced on a separate episode. Do I think that's enough time? No. Do I think Doohan showed some promising moments? Yes, I do. Do I think that there is a good F1 driver in there? Yes, I do. But I can see why they've done it. I just don't think they've given him enough time. That's what I'll say. I don't think they've given him enough time. But on Doohan's side of things, I just wish he'd played Miami a little bit safer. He's one of the few drivers, as I've said, that I would completely be fine with him playing it safe, keeping his nose so clean and just bringing the car home. I think that's all I wanted from him, was just to bring that car home in one piece. But unfortunately, we've got another retirement. And, you know, he's had some high-profile crashes. That crash in Japan was no joke, and it was completely driver error. I feel bad for Jack Doohan, but I just wish he'd kept it clean. I just wish he'd kept it clean, and we might not be having this conversation. As I said, at the time of recording, there is no confirmation from the team. By every account, this episode might be out after the confirmation is live, but we'll talk about it more in depth when it happens, because as I said, I think it is just a matter of waiting for the announcement now. Next up is Aston Martin and Lance Stroll, who finished the sprint 5th, qualified for the main race 19th and finished 16th. And Fernando Alonso, who did not finish the sprint, qualified for the main race 17th and finished 15th. For Fernando Alonso, I think the DNF in the sprint is a shame. And, you know, he was on track to score his first points of the season, and he got that ruined by Liam Lawson. I felt quite bad for him, to be honest with you, because his race was ruined through no fault of his own. He was hanging on to the back of Hamilton during that sprint race in that fucking tractor of an Aston Martin. And I just feel so bad that his chance of points was ruined by Liam Lawson. And then we moved on to quali, and it was an absolute shocker of a qualifying for Fernando Alonso. And then he was absolutely nowhere in that race. And give me just a second, I'll quickly touch on Lance Stroll, and then we'll talk about Aston Martin in general. But Lance Stroll picking up some very good points in the sprint race for doing absolutely hee-haw. I don't know what it is about Lance Stroll that just has these race weekends where he, as he normally does completely and utterly nothing, is just there, going about his Sunday drive, and just somehow manages to get points because of the chaos on the track happening all around him. It's not like he's having these big battles out on track and scoring these points. He's literally doing hee-haw, and he somehow manages to come home 5th on the road. It's insane. It's absolutely wild to me. Lance Stroll is just an enigma in Formula 1 to me. I don't understand him, because he's either doing fucking nothing and at the back of the pack, or he's doing fucking nothing and scoring points. I don't get it. It's just an enigma to me. It's stressing me out. But yeah, well done on Lance Stroll on a decent sprint race at least. I don't really know what's going on with Aston Martin as a whole, as a team, to be honest with you. It kind of just feels like they've just given up on this year. They're like, fuck it, just ride out the year, we'll see what happens. We finish where we finish. You know, if we finish a much lower position, it means we've got way more wind tunnel time for these new regulations that are coming in. Let's just lock Newey in a room and hope he creates a fucking rocket ship, and we'll just take it from 2026 onwards. Like, it just feels like Aston Martin have just downed tools for the 2025 season. I just don't get it. I don't understand what's happening with Aston Martin at the moment, but the whole team's an enigma to me. The whole team is just a complete enigma to me this year. I just don't understand what they're fighting for, or, you know, what the end goal is, because it's not that clear. Track performances are pretty grim. As I said, Lance Stroll, it's either fucking nothing, or, you know, he's just happened to capitalise on a mad situation with penalties and retirements, and he's just propelled him to P5. Alonso's just having an absolute nightmare of a year so far. It's just all very bizarre to me. It's very, very bizarre to me. I just don't really understand it. You know, they're currently sitting 7th in the championship with only V-Carb, Alpine and Sauber behind them. But I can see a world where they end up sitting 9th in the championship because V-Carb and Alpine managed to get some decent points finishes in where Aston Martin can't. I just don't get it, because it's almost like they've rocked up to this year with a wheelie bin and we're just going on our Sunday drives. There seems to be no real drive about the team this year. I just don't understand it. It's all very bizarre to me. It's very odd. So yeah, that's Aston Martin. It's all just a bit strange, isn't it? Next up is Mercedes and George Russell, who finished 4th in the sprint, qualified 5th for the main race and finished 3rd. And Kimi Antonelli, who finished the sprint 7th, qualified for the main race 3rd and finished 6th. For George Russell, I have to say, he's just there, isn't he? He's just a silent assassin. You know, he's just moving silently. He's not causing any big waves. He's not in any huge battles. He's just there, keeping his nose clean, doing his thing, and capitalising on everyone else being fucking maniacs, and just keeps popping up on the podiums. He just keeps popping up P3. It's so wild, because you just never see anything of him pretty much through the whole race, and then bang, he's on a podium. He's just there. He's capitalising on all of this drama that's happening around him, with Ferrari not being fast enough, and, you know, they're fighting Williams, and then you've got Max and the McLarens all fighting one another. You've got Antonelli absolutely sending it every which way, and he's just tootling along and then finishing a race on the podium. He's absolutely smashing it this year, and I don't think he's getting enough recognition, to be honest with you. He's currently 4th in the championship with 93 points. He's only 6 points behind Max, who's in 3rd with 99 points. Lando's then in 2nd with 115. There is a world in which the top 3, Max, Lando and Oscar, have some kind of issue where there's a crash or something happens in front that can just propel George Russell to a race win, and he's suddenly got 25 points on the rest of them and popped himself a couple of positions higher in the championship. He's just there doing his thing. He's just moving silently, and he's just a little, as I said, a little silent assassin, just ready to pounce when the time's right and score a podium. I've got nothing else to say about him. He's just absolutely smashing it. So well done, George Russell. His teammate Kimi Antonelli, who has a new Netflix documentary come out called The Seat, that we are going to watch this week, and we will come back to you with our thoughts. I think it's a wee one episode there, 40 minutes, and apparently it's very, very good. So we'll be back with our thoughts on that once we've watched it. I think with Kimi, he is absolutely smashing targets. Absolutely smashing it. Listen, he came into this year, after getting signed last year, with huge question marks over his head. He wasn't having the best Formula 2 season. It was also his rookie Formula 2 season. He wasn't having the best time. There was lots of question marks of people saying, oh, is this too early? Is he being fast-tracked? This is too much of a rush. There's so much pressure on him to, you know, absolutely deliver because he's replacing Lewis Hamilton, and he's never going to be able to live up to that, and this is just too much to put onto an 18-year-old. And he's just there. He's just absolutely putting the work in, and he's so exciting to watch. So exciting to watch. That sprint qualifying where he popped it on pole was insane. He's absolutely killing it for me. He's absolutely killing it. And then we get into the sprint race, and he obviously has that incident with Max in the pit lane, which is unfortunate because it did ruin his race. We'll come on and talk about that in a wee second. But he had a bad start to the race, and he did make some mistakes, and you know, it meant that he was never really there to capitalise on anything that came his way. And that was a little bit disappointing. I was a bit disappointed in him for the mistakes he was making. But then I remember it's his rookie year, and I try and take everything with just a pinch of salt. I do think that his performance on the sprint with these mistakes and stuff is just that little bit of inexperience showing. As I said, it's his rookie season, so I'm not going to be too harsh on him. When it came to his fight with Oscar, you know, putting it around the outside of Oscar isn't really going to work, because Oscar won't leave you the room. If Oscar's on the inside, he won't leave you the room. We just seen that in Saudi Arabia. And I do think that is just maybe a little bit of an inexperience from Antonelli to not sort of realise that. And do you know something? And to be fair, it's not a big deal. He'll live and he'll learn from it. It's one of these things. It's all part of the process of being a rookie and just being an F1 driver, is figuring out how your competitors drive and what their hallmarks are and how to, navigate these situations with these drivers. So I'm not worried about it. And I think that what is just very exciting about Kimi Antonelli is he will just go for it. I think that is what I love about Kimi Antonelli, is he's not afraid to just absolutely send it, where, we've got some drivers that play things maybe a bit too safe, and we'll come on to an example of it later, and maybe don't take the risks. It's a lot of Formula One is risk versus reward, and sometimes you take the gamble and you take the risk and it doesn't pay off, but sometimes you do, and it just pays you back tenfold. And that's what I love about Antonelli, is he's just there and he's willing and ready to just absolutely send it and just get the job done. It's very exciting to watch. Obviously, his sprint race incident with Max Verstappen, Max had an unsafe release in the pits, and he was released straight into the path of Antonelli. It meant that Antonelli then had to go another lap, couldn't pit that lap because he couldn't get into his pit box, had to do another lap before pitting again, and it just ruined his sprint. What I will say is P7 is not the worst outcome. He could have finished completely out of the points. I do think there was a little help from some penalties that kind of helped him get that P7, but it is just a bit unfortunate. And you could tell he was a bit dismayed by it. And this is where my things with the sprint, my issues with the sprint come into play, because you had Toto Wolff come over the radio and be like, Kimi, don't worry, doesn't matter. It's a baby race. Doesn't mean anything. And it's just really weird to hear that coming from a team principal like Toto Wolff when Formula One really tries to push the sprint races and this format. And, when it comes to the sprint race format, it's just all out to the checkered flag. There's no, obviously we've got pit stops and stuff this time because of the weather and everything like that, but normally it's just all out, on you go. And a lot of the time it just feels like these sprints become completely irrelevant because we've got qualifying in a couple hours. And a lot of the drivers will perhaps just play the sprint a little bit safer because they don't want to cause any damage or any issues to their car, because they might not have a chance to get a decent qualifying in if the car can't be fixed in time, or it is fixed but they go out, there's still an issue, and they've not got the performance in the quali. This format that we have for the sprint weekends is not working, because, as I said, the sprints just do become completely irrelevant, and the teams even feel like that. They're just like, this is just completely irrelevant. Like, the big stuff comes in tomorrow, and all our focus is going to be on the qualifying position for that main race, because, as I said, we're in a qualifiers championship, so the big thing for them will be the qualifying for that main race. I think there would be so much more put on the sprint if we went back to the old format, which I understand had its issues, where you qualified, you did your sprint race, and that sprint race set the grid for the main race. You would then get an extra practice session in because you could do quali and the sprint on the same day, and then you've got 2 practice sessions on the Friday. And I understand why they've done it, because they want to bring a little bit more competitiveness into each day. So, if you can only afford to go to a Friday on a sprint weekend, you've still got an exciting qualifying session to watch. It's not just practices. If you can only afford to go on a Saturday, you've got a quali and a mini race. I get it, but I just don't think the format's working 100%. And it just seems to be this throwaway little thing that nobody really cares about. And it just frustrates me, because it has the makings to be great, but it's just not working, in my opinion. In terms of qualifying, I'd have to say fucking brilliant from Kimi Antonelli. A P1 in the sprint quali, and then a P3 in the main quali, 0.02 of a second off Norris. Like, that's no joke. He's absolutely nailing it, and it's so exciting to watch Kimi Antonelli. And then coming home 6th in the main race, no mean feat. Decent points in the bag. The fact that Kimi Antonelli is 6th in the championship, ahead of the likes of Lewis Hamilton, Alex Albon, Esteban Ocon, Stroll, Tsunoda, Gasly, it just speaks absolute volumes to how much of a talent Antonelli is, and I know he's in an incredibly competitive car that actually seems to be fairly well-rounded. I thought that they would really struggle in the sort of hotter temperatures and stuff, and I know Miami wasn't as hot because of the weather. I mean, the humidity was a bit higher and stuff, whatever. But they seem to have built a pretty decent car for this year. And, you know, he's able to get some absolute banging performances in. So it's great. Well done, Kimi Antonelli. All right, next up, Red Bull. And we have Yuki Tsunoda, who finished the sprint 6th, qualified for the main race 10th and finished 10th. And Max Verstappen, who finished the sprint 17th, qualified for the main race 1st and finished 4th. I've not really got much to say for Yuki for the sprint. Finishing 6th, decent points in the bag, well done. I am going to need a little bit more from Yuki now. I think, you know, he's come in, he's doing better than the previous drivers of that car. It's very clear. You know, he's getting to grips with it quicker. He's still struggling with it, but it's manageable for him. I am going to need him to start progressing towards Max. I think he is still just a little bit too adrift from Max Verstappen, and we know that Max is an incredibly talented driver who can just hook up these perfect performances, but I do need Tsunoda to start gaining a little bit on Max. And I know that Yuki was doing a test in Silverstone with old Red Bull machinery to get himself acclimatized and accustomed to these cars, to driving a Red Bull car, that kind of got hampered a little bit because the weather wasn't great. They didn't bring the correct tyres for it because they didn't think they'd need it, and you know, the running kind of got cut short. So I understand that there is that, but I do just need him to be a bit further up the field now and a bit closer to Max. Like, he could get a P10 and a V-carb. Do you know what I mean? So maybe just a little bit more is what I need from Yuki. He did pick up a 5-second time penalty, as I said, for speeding in the pit lane. I think he'll be pretty happy that Isaac Hadjar didn't have the pace to close that gap so that he could still remain in the points and pick up a point, because it was touch and go that he could have been demoted to 11th. But yeah, I just want a little bit more from Yuki now. I'm ready for him to start progressing up the grid in that Red Bull car. His teammate Max Verstappen, and whoa boy, do we have a lot to talk about with Max. Right, where do we begin? Max v Kimi in the sprint. Now, Max did pick up a 10-second time penalty for an unsafe release. As I said, he came in for his pit stop, the light went green, he came out of the pit box and was straight into the path of Kimi Antonelli, damaged his own front wing, obviously ruined his race because that 10-second penalty meant he finished last on the sprint. And I actually think it's the first time since like 2016 that Max has finished outside the points. Is that correct? I'm sure I read that somewhere. I've seen a lot of people say that the 10-second time penalty isn't enough, and you know, why was Max penalised? It should have been more on the team because it's the team's fault that he was released into the path of Antonelli. And listen, I mean, it's up for debate. However, the stewards don't look into those kind of details in terms of what the outcome of the incident was. They just look at the incident, and the incident was Max was released unsafely into the pits. They will just open up the regulations, they'll just open up the rule book, find that article and say that is a pit lane infraction, it's an unsafe release, 10-second time penalty, boom, there you are, Max Verstappen, 10 seconds. They don't look at any of the other contributing factors, really. Like, they don't look at the fact that Antonelli couldn't pit and it basically ruined his race. They don't look at the damage that was caused to Max's car. They don't look at any of this stuff. They just see, oh, unsafe release, what's that, 10 seconds, bam, slap, there you are, Max Verstappen, put the kettle on. They don't look at any of the details. It's just flat penalties for whatever the infraction is. Now, I've seen a lot of people say Max shouldn't have gotten a penalty. The team should have gotten, you know, whatever that is. And I have to say that that's great because it is the team's fault. However, Max had to get a penalty. They had to give the driver a penalty. Okay, so there was nothing given to the team. Now, that'll be why there'll be a lot of people saying Max shouldn't have gotten a penalty. The team should have taken the penalty and, you know, whatever. However, they have to penalise Max. Giving the team a fine won't really do anything, because if that was just the, oh, right, give the team a 10 grand fine, whatever, right, as an example, I think you just open yourself up to having teams do these kind of things, releasing unsafely into the pit lane, because the team will take all the fine on and it won't affect the drivers in any way. But because it doesn't affect the drivers, that then in turn means it doesn't affect the constructors. And remember, the two drivers are out there scoring points for not only themselves, but for the constructors. So giving Max a 10-second penalty has then affected the team's constructor standing because they're not then scoring the points they need for that championship. I get it's a double-sided coin because it is a team error. You know, they want to save as much time as possible, so we don't use the paddles anymore. It's all an electronic light, and there's a guy that controls that light, and he presses the button to say when, you know, the Max can go. And I've seen a clip where it looks like he's just not really even paying attention to the fact that Antonelli's coming down the pit lane. And, you know, it is the team's fault because the team have pressed the button, they've released Max, he's just following what the team are basically instructing him to do. But they have to penalise Max because it is a penalty on the team, because it affects the constructors. If they had just let Max go, find the team some money, Max could have then still gone on and scored some championship points, which, yes, is good for him as a driver, but it's also good for Red Bull as a team. So the penalty on Max is also a penalty on the team. Then we move on to the qualifying, and Max does Max things and sticks that car on pole. He is an absolute beast. He just pulls out these phenomenal laps, and it's just Max doing Max things, isn't it? There is no way that I believe that car should be on pole position. That pole should have been Lando Norris's, but he screwed up by riding the curb too much and lost out a load of time there. And what you have in Max Verstappen is a driver who is incredibly smart in his driving, is a fucking brilliant driver, and utilises his machinery to the absolute best that he can. And there's no way when I came into this season, after seeing the performance and testing, that I thought Max Verstappen would have the most pole positions out of any driver so far this year. It just doesn't make sense. And then we got on to the main race. Lap 1, turn 1, Verstappen locks up a little bit and it allows Norris to come along beside him. And then coming into turn 2, Norris gets a bit uneasy, rides the apex of the turn 2 corner, and Max just off he goes. Now this really seems to have split a lot of people. Lando obviously came over the radio and said that he was pushed off. A lot of people think that Max should have been given a penalty for it, should have given the position back, that it was Lando's corner. I have to say, I don't think that is the case. I'm of the opinion that they were side by side going into that corner and Lando was never going to make it. These cars are too big for that kind of move. Now listen, I would rather Lando tried the move because, I'll talk about this in a second, but Lando I think sometimes just plays it a bit too safe and doesn't take the risk that's needed. I don't think it was a stupid move from Lando, but I just think he was unlucky that he couldn't make it stick. I don't think Max pushed him off the track. I think Max just defended the corner better, to be honest with you. And there's a lot of talk about Max's defensive driving, because later in the broadcast when Max was fighting Piastri and was fighting Lando later, Martin Brundle said, you know, that he was defending too much against the drivers, and you know, it was just all a bit too much when he was sort of defending against Lando, and I have to say that's just completely mental. What we were getting was wheel-to-wheel action, and that's what we want. We want there to be wheel-to-wheel fighting and racing, and I think this sport has become too reliant recently with DRS overtakes. Like a lot of it is just super easy, DRS overtakes, and there you are. There's no real battling. And what we got this time around was some real good battling, especially between Oscar and Max. Like, we want hard racing, and it just seems that the sport and sometimes the commentators, and Martin Brundle is the first to say, you know, DRS should never be used as an overtaking opportunity. It's there to bring you into the fold, but you shouldn't use it as an overtake. All our overtakes pretty much are DRS overtakes. When we get wheel-to-wheel racing and, you know, there's real battling out on track, a lot of the time some of the commentators are like, oh, that's, you know, that defensive driving's a bit too much. We want hard racing. We want them to be fighting each other and battling out on track. This is what we want. And listen, I'll be the first to admit when Max Verstappen is wrong. Like in Saudi Arabia, I will say that lap 1, turn 1 incident, he was in the wrong. Mexico last year, he was in the wrong. I'm ready to admit that. I don't think he was in the wrong with this incident with Lando. I just don't think that Max was in the wrong this time round, to be honest with you. I don't think it was worthy of a penalty. I think that it is just racing. It's a lap one racing incident. I don't see there being any need for a penalty. I don't think Max pushed Lando off the track. All right, next up, Ferrari. And we have Lewis Hamilton, who finished the sprint 3rd, qualified for the main race 12th, and finished 8th. And Charles Leclerc, who did not finish the sprint, didn't actually start the sprint, qualified 8th for the main race and finished 7th. So when it comes to the sprint, I have to say Ferrari just doing Ferrari decisions. They stuck both the drivers on intermediates. I think that was a completely wrong call. You know, it did kind of work for Lewis Hamilton. He managed to get P3 in the end, but, you know, even he was questioning, why are we on intermediate tyres? And I questioned that because it was absolutely chucking it down. Why they were ever on inters, I don't know, but here we are. When it came to Lewis's qualifying, you know, out in Q2, and I have to say I think Ferrari seemed to be about the 5th fastest car at the moment. He struggled in the sprint, but he made it work. And, you know, they kind of did the right call on the strategy, which is weird to say for Ferrari. And then he's absolutely nowhere throughout the qualifying session and through the majority of Q2. And it's almost like Ferrari were like, well, do you know what? We did our bit today. We managed to get in P3 in the sprint race. So pack up the tools and we'll see you tomorrow at the track. Yeah, I just don't understand it. And he was absolutely fighting that car through Q2. And it just had a complete lack of pace. I want to talk about Charles Leclerc's sprint quickly before we come on and talk about the race and sort of wrap up Ferrari as a whole, because fuck me, that was depressing. Watching Charles Leclerc crash on the reconnaissance lap. He must be one of the most unlucky F1 drivers ever. And it's not like it was like just an aquaplaning into the barrier at a slow corner. He was coming at some speed where the tyres just wouldn't move and he just sent it straight into the wall. Caused himself a whole load of damage, obviously couldn't partake in the sprint. Got himself referred to the stewards and was reprimanded for driving in an unsafe condition back to the pit lane with obvious and substantial damage to the car. I mean, the wing was broken, the back suspension I think was broken, the wheel was basically coming off. It's just absolutely insane to me. And then we get to the qualifying and he gets out-qualified by both the Williams drivers. Like, I don't even think Charles Leclerc could win Monaco this year because that car just has zero qualifying pace. Absolutely nothing. And it's beginning to annoy me that the car just has no pace. Absolutely no pace whatsoever. And, you know, this is a man that is Mr. Saturday. He's an incredibly good qualifier. And we're getting out qualified by a Williams. Both Williams. You know, I came into this year and was very excited about the whole thing, the whole prospect of Ferrari. It seemed to be a great dynamic with Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, two incredible drivers. And then, you know, I got a bit worried when Fred Vasseur said that they had taken about 1% of the previous year's car across to this year's car, and basically a completely new car for 1 year. It's not a big regulation change. We're doing 1 year and then changing the regs. And we do this huge overhaul of the car. And now, you know, in 2024, we were fighting for poles and wins. And, you know, it was amazing. We were winning Monza, Monaco, Mexico, Austin. Like, we got some big wins in there, fighting for poles, scoring good points. We were on the podiums. And now we're fighting for what, like P8? I just don't understand it, and it's beginning to piss me off how bad this year is for Ferrari. Like, it's not even a joke anymore. I know we're all like, oh, 2026 will be our year now. I don't think it'll ever be Ferrari's year if we keep going on like this, because it's absolutely insane. During the main race, we had a little bit of an intra-team battle between Lewis and Charles, basically against the team more than anything else. And it came just after Leclerc had finished battling Sainz. Hamilton was on medium tyres and, you know, his tyres were in a better working window. Charles Leclerc was on hards that were obviously taking a little bit longer to get into that window. We knew that because of George Russell starting on the hards at the beginning. He was struggling with them until they sort of got into that working window. Ferrari don't seem to be able to make decisions quick enough. You know, Hamilton saying, let me through on Leclerc. I've got better tyres and I can really try and make an attack on Antonelli. And I know we all make a joke of this, like, oh, we're checking from Ferrari, but they take far too long to make decisions and they always make the wrong call at the wrong time. I'd rather they just said, fuck it, let Hamilton through and we'll see what happens. And if he can't get to Antonelli and Leclerc's tyres come in better, then we'll fucking swap it back again and on he goes. But they fucking dilly-dally all the time and I just don't get it. So then when they do issue team orders, It's been 3 laps of Hamilton being stuck behind Leclerc, so that when he finally gets through Leclerc, his tyres don't really, he's been sat in dirty air, his tyres aren't in the right window now, and he can't then go and chase down Antonelli. And obviously Hamilton was not impressed. His radio calls were incredibly sassy, and you then have Leclerc on the hotline saying Hamilton needs to start going faster because I'm just stuck in the dirty air and it's affecting me. His tyres then get into an operating window that's better, and he's then back on the hotline saying, let me through on Hamilton. Ferrari say, yeah, of course, no worries, on you go. But they don't tell Hamilton that they're doing team orders. So Hamilton obviously doesn't cede the position because he doesn't know he has to. So it obviously pisses off Charles Leclerc, and he's all, we'll talk about this after the race, which I can't keep having this. We'll discuss this later because it's just an absolute joke that Ferrari are just so incompetent at making the right calls. Leclerc obviously does get past Hamilton, but he's not happy. We've then got Lewis, as I said, with some of the best radio messages. You know, when Charles Leclerc joined Ferrari, we thought he's too much of a nice guy to be putting up with Ferrari's bullshit time and time again. But now he's at that, you know, sassy, he's giving it the all, let's add that to the words of wisdom kind of chat. And he's not afraid to, you know, speak out against the team over the radio when he thinks they're making the wrong calls. I can't believe that we're only 6 races into this Ferrari and Lewis partnership and Lewis is already calling out the team in that way. I can't believe it's taken us only 6 races for this kind of stuff to happen. It's insane to me. His radio message about Sainz when they came over and they were like, Sainz is what, like 1.4 behind you? And he was like, cool, do you want me to let him pass and all? As I said, it was absolutely hilarious in 2 ways of like a and then a It's just wild to have come from Lewis at Mercedes where him and Bono and the team were just so in sync to him coming to Ferrari and they're just not clicking at all whatsoever. There's just nothing there. And then you look at the car and you just think, what is going on with this car? And Fred keeps saying, you know, the car's got potential. Where? Where is the car? Where is the potential? Is the potential in the room with us? Because I don't know where it is. Why are we not unlocking this potential? And apparently we're bringing some upgrades to Imola. What's the point anymore? Like, just fucking call it a day and start putting everything towards 2026 because we're already fucking a quarter of the way in. We're fucking nowhere and I've had enough. And I know we've still got like 3/4 of a season to go, but it's just depressing. At this point, I actually think with the pace of that Ferrari that Lewis and Charles would be much better driving the fucking Lego cars that were made for them to do the driver's parade, which was absolutely iconic and probably one of the best things Formula One has done in a long time. Like, we'll never see Lewis and Charles smiling like this driving the SF25. Not at all. The car has absolutely no pace and we're fighting fucking Williams in the constructors, man. It's depressing. And listen, I know that Ferrari is Leclerc's dream, but it's really hurting to see how much they're just wasting his time with this absolute nonsense because they just don't seem to be able to build a car correctly at the moment. Like, I just don't understand how we went from such a promising 2024 to a complete trash 2025. And I understand that they might have thought, you know, we hit the ceiling with the 2024 car, we've got nowhere to take it, so let's do something completely different, but it's clearly just not the right option. You know, McLaren, if you look at McLaren, they were able to improve in pretty much half a season, and I understand that they were shit for about 10 years, and then they suddenly got good, but the turnaround has been insane. The turnaround for Williams is insane in just a few years of James Vowles being there. Red Bull, with all of their problems, are still able to get that car into a working window and go and win a race, stick it on pole. Like, they're still fighting. They're still 10 times better than us. And Ferrari just isn't able to improve anywhere, it seems. And they just keep bringing more and more excuses for it. Like, at this point, I'm thinking, do you know what? We'll take a sprint win for Lewis in China. Let's wrap it up. Move it on to 26. I'm just so over the bullshit and the excuses from this team because it's all it seems to be. And I've seen a lot on social media of people saying Fred should get fired for this. That's taking it too far. It's taking it too far. And I also think that there has to become a point where it's no longer the team principal's fault. You know, Binotto was shite, fire him. Fred shite, fire him. There has to become a point where we kind of say to ourselves, maybe it's not the team principal. Maybe there is a deeper rooted issue within Ferrari. You know, just look at WEC. They're doing absolutely amazing in the Endurance Championship, and then we come to Formula One and we're doing fucking nothing. All right, wrapping things up with McLaren. And Lando Norris, who finished first in the sprint, qualified second and finished second in the Grand Prix. And Oscar Piastri, who finished second in the sprint, qualified fourth for the Grand Prix and finished the Grand Prix first. Later in the race, we have some great battling between Piastri and Max, and I love watching these two fight each other. I think it's so much fun. And it is proper hard battling that these pair do between Max and Oscar. Piastri obviously managed to get through on Max. Max forced him wide and Piastri managed to pull out of it. Piastri just positions himself correctly that it forces Max to go wide, and Piastri just manages to go and take the lead of the race, which I absolutely loved, that little battle between them two. You then have Norris battling Max, and it's much and such the same. Max forces Lando wide. He doesn't take the smart move and bail out of it and switch the position and everything like that, like Oscar did. He just kind of runs himself wide. And we end up in this situation, kind of similar to what we had in Saudi, where Lando just wastes time attempting these moves that aren't going to work and just, you know, ruins a few laps for himself that he could really use later down the line. And then what you end up is having the team coaching Lando on how to get past Max the way that Oscar did. Norris, who manages to get past Max at turn 11, he pushes Max wide, he gives the position back, and then on the next lap manages to get through Max. He manages to force his way through again at turn 11. But what we have is just a few laps that Lando wastes, not really doing anything. Like, it's just the same sort of mistakes he likes to make. You know, when you watch Piastri has a tenacity about him. He will absolutely just go for the move. And like, it's almost like he just squares up to Max. He looks Max in the eyes and says, let's go. Let's go. What are you going to do? And I don't know why Lando is a bit more measured in his approach when it comes to the likes of Max. I don't know whether it is his thoughts about the championship and, you know, any DNFs or anything, and his rivals have got 25, 24 points jump on him in the championship. You know, if Lando had a collision with Max or anything like that and it took him out of the race, that's Oscar got a 25-point jump on top of the already 16 points he's got on Lando in that championship. The hesitation that he has doing this, and the hesitation he had in Miami, cost him about 9 seconds. And I want him just to send it. I want him to go for these bold moves and just really take a fight to him. And I don't think it's fair when people say Lando doesn't have it in him to be champion because he's not, you know, the same type of driver as a Schumacher or a Senna or anything, or a Verstappen. You know, we never really seen Lewis making those big, crazy dive-bomby moves, and he's a 7-time champion. But I do kind of feel like Lando is just resting on his laurels, and he's not going to win a championship that way. He's not going to win the championship by just continuously playing it safe all the time. He needs to be putting big fights in. Like, Oscar is just getting the job done. He just gets the moves done. Like, yeah, you can say that Oscar manages to take the lead of that race because Max ran wide, but Max ran wide because of where Oscar positioned his car. Max outbraked himself because of where Oscar was positioning his car. Unfortunately for Lando, when it did come to the sort of coaching on this is how Oscar managed to get past Max with Max doing these things, Max was wise to it now after having it, you know, Oscar just pulled those moves. So that's where it then begins to take a little bit longer. But I just think that sometimes Lando can be a bit reckless and a bit scrappy. And not reckless in a way that he's being aggressive or, you know, making these big bold moves and that's where it's costing him. Just reckless and scrappy in the fact that he's just continuously wasting his own time. As I said, he wasted 9 seconds, and that's 9 seconds that he could have used towards the end of the race where he was the faster of the two McLarens in that final stint, but couldn't get close to Oscar. Like, I understand if he's being measured because of the championship and all it takes could be one DNF to completely turn the tide of this whole thing, but I just want Lando to be a bit more aggressive. That's all I'm saying. Piastri's racecraft is just absolutely insane, and I remember sort of last year saying, you know, he's got the racecraft, he's got the mentality, he just needs the outright pace, and, you know, if he had Lando's pace, he's a shoo-in. Well, he's now got that pace. He's got that pace, he's got that racecraft, he's got that mentality. Nothing phases him. He's just smooth, cool, calm, collected all the time. He gets out that car and it's like nothing happened. And it's almost like Formula One's just his hobby. Like, he's just coming to do this on a Sunday just because he enjoys doing it. And I think it's too early to say that Oscar is winning the championship, but there is a reason he's the bookies' favourite. I wouldn't say he's dominating. It's not like a Max Verstappen 23 domination where he's on pole and then he's winning by a huge margin, or a Schumacher where he's on pole and he's winning by a huge margin, or anything like that. He's just driving incredibly well and is just there, making the correct moves, being forceful and aggressive and getting the job done and just not taking any nonsense and just doing what needs to be done to get the wins. He's now, that's 3 wins in a row for Oscar. And this is a year that I thought Lando would absolutely dominate. And that's Oscar now gone and won 4 races this year compared to Lando's 1. It's wild to me. And to be able to claw back that big loss that he had in Australia to now be 16 points ahead of Lando in the championship is no mean feat. So well done, Oscar Piastri. I think he's incredibly impressive, and I can't believe he's in his third season and he is the bookies' favourite for winning the championship. Give your flowers where they're due, mate. You are absolutely smashing it, and I love watching Oscar Piastri at the moment. Absolutely love it. As I said with Lando, I just want him to be a bit more aggressive and take those risks, because he's never going to win a championship by playing it safe. And even when I did say that, Lewis didn't do the dive bombs or the risky moves, but he was there to make the bold choices, and, he was there to capitalize, and he was there to do all these things, and he didn't play it 100% safe. And I just feel that Lando is playing it safe and resting on his laurels, and by doing that, he'll not win the championship that way. He needs to be, because all the other drivers will make those bold, aggressive moves. That's where Lando will lose out. It is a very long season. We've still got 3/4 of the season to go, but he needs to start making bold choices. And, I thought that with Lando's outright pace and everything, he was just going to fly away with the championship, and that's not the case so far. I will say, however, for the team championship, for the constructors, it's definitely McLaren's. They're retaining the championship, I think, this year. Obviously, this is a sport where the whole thing can change like that, but they're 246 points in the championship. They are over 100 points ahead of Mercedes in P2. That's a lot of work to catch up to them. And, I think McLaren will just run away with this championship. I think the drivers will be a little bit of a fight. And that is everything from us, from a very exciting Miami Grand Prix weekend. I'm glad that it delivered us something. And hopefully this episode isn't too long for you. The raw recording right now is 2 hours long. Hopefully we can whittle that down so that it's not just me waffling at you for too long. But yeah, that's everything from us. I believe the next video from this will be our Monaco Formula E vlog. That is unless there's any huge announcements coming out within the next couple of days in terms of Jack Doohan. As I said, I believe it's a done deal. We're just waiting to find out now. But yeah, not looking good for him. Next race weekend is Imola. That is not this weekend, but next. So we will be back with predictions for that very, very soon. But thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day. I love you. Bye.